Let's open this up to a general discussion now, and please jump in and make this as lively as you possibly can. Let's go back to who's doing this well and who isn't. You made this great point, or it was a great comment that you made on the back of Davos, which I've got here, and you said, this is a quote from Mike. There's a Dutch CEO thing going on in sustainable business leadership, Pullman, Bolland, etc. Because it's a trading nation which thinks long term. Is that what drives the success at the policy, or one at the policy level and two at the corporate level?
I certainly think for chief executives, those that run businesses that naturally look outwards, thinking of the future, that think of their consumers, are going to end up at this place. Those businesses that are used to operating as monopolies, where it's about lobbying for government and compliance and laws rather than winning the customer every day of their life, it's a bit harder for.
Right.
They're very much locked into protecting what they had in the past rather than embracing what they could have in the future.
Neil, which coalition, in your view, and this is putting you on the spot a little bit here, but which coalition, in your view, is the most forward-thinking and forward-looking and getting it right in that regard?
If I could just go back to the Dutch thing, though, because there was a saying I grew up with in Ireland, which is that if you put the Dutch in Ireland, they'd feed the world. If you put the Irish in Holland, they'd sink it. Now, hopefully we've disproved that over the course of my generation with everything Ireland has done since then. But the thing that I have been personally fascinated with is that ability to create bottom-up pressure on the entire system. Because if you can actually create that sense amongst the Daily Mail readers and the people who read The Sun and the people who watch Fox News in the US, that it's just a no-brainer to want things to be seasonal, to want things to be local, to just expect sustainability like it's a new normal. That changes the policy framework overnight, because every time an MP walk in the run-up to May, they'll just hear it as the number one or number two issue. Yeah. My kid has asthma. Why are you making me drive around in these dirty streets? They just see the links with, to Helen's point, with health and everything else. So I think that bottom-up pressure through platforms like Collectively, which I think business proved over the last 10 or 15 years that we've learned, and we've had to learn the hard way, how to collaborate deep in our supply chains on things that affect us all. What we were never good at until this was how do you collaborate in the face of the consumer. M&S think they own that dialogue, Unilever think they own that dialogue, BT thinks they own that dialogue, so does Coke. But how do you actually all say, let's take our egos off the table? What do we know really works? What's the kind of the thing that our marketing guys can teach us that we've never thought about before that can actually engage people at pace and scale?
So which coalition is doing that?
Collectively.
Well, so that's at the top for you?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, so Mike.
I mean, let me provocative. I think there are three things that any business should do in terms of collaboration on carbon. Firstly, back we mean business. Three things within that family. Back a carbon tax, back 100% renewables, back transparent reporting. That's what you should do on a corporate scale, whichever business you are. Secondly, if you've got a business-to-consumer business model, collectively, get behind it, ensure that we're all engaging consumers across the planet in a different way. And third thing, then get back to your sector, the consumer goods forum that represents my sort of industry, and change that. Make sure it comes to Paris in 9 months' time, with these the two material carbon impacts that we can make, and this is our plan to tackle them.
Okay, I'd be interested to hear your view on this, Helen. And let's throw in there where you're focusing, aiming for A's efforts in the medium term now.
And we're doing quite a lot of work on public policy positions, including meaningful price on carbon, because I think that is one of the things that can engage companies from across all the sectors, including the utilities and the oil and gas sector. They've been very clear about that. I think one thing that's very interesting for the corporate sector is all your pension funds. Your pension funds are investors, so seeing some of the corporate pension funds getting involved in the investor initiatives would be an incredibly useful thing to see.
Why do you think the coalitions now, the ones we're talking about this evening, are going to be so much more successful than the coalitions we've seen working on this in the past?
I think it's partly about learning. So when we developed Aiming for A, we were looking a lot at the historic investor coalitions, a lot of the historic use of shareholder resolutions, and we did quite a detailed analysis of what had been done in the past and what could be done differently in the future. And I've seen a lot of that in the business community as well. I've also seen individual investors holding their coalitions to account and getting them to collaborate. And I think that's happening in the business sector too.
And I guess, Trevor, the people who are leading this push, the seniority of those people, the Paul Polmans right at the top, I mean, that's something new. The sort of people leading, the sort of leadership that we're seeing in this space. There's been a massive shift there as well, I imagine, right?
Well, it's absolutely key. We need business leadership to really show exemplar ways of how this issue can be tackled, that it's good for business, it's not necessarily just for the environmental purposes, but it's also good for the bottom line as well. And I think it's about, though, mobilising the sectors of the economy, though, and the parts of the business community, though, that aren't hearing that message or aren't acting on that message. The people in this room are not the people that we need to persuade. It's the other people that are having some big businesses which have perhaps still got their head in the sand. And so it's really by showing leadership and sort of dragging these other sectors of the business community along with us, actually, that they get to the sense of we're getting less behind here, and actually this is going to be a risk to our business model. It's a resilience issue as well, and therefore, we really need to wake up to this message.
I think the thing that defines the most successful, all the three we're talking about here, is the absence of ego. It's that articulation of a vision, something that's bigger than all of us from the very start, and people realizing that ego is a hugely limiting factor in trying to achieve something that ambitious. And there's a really nice natural selection that happens, and Mike and I have seen this, as you kind of work in the background to manage some of these things, where as soon as somebody arrives thinking, great, here is now the thing that's going to bring my agenda to the fore, literally within 6 to 7 weeks they've got frustrated and disappeared, whereas people who are really in it to actually try and change things and deliver outcomes and impact at scale stay the course and go through the good days and the bad days together. And the truth about it is that a lot of what's knitting all of this together in the background is relationships. Right. It's that ability to pick up the phone and say, sure, Mike, I think we need to manage this differently, and trusting each other.
To be fair, and apologies if I sound cynical about this, but a bit of greenwashing in there as well, which always sort of speaks to the ego, right?
Well, I don't think the issue is greenwashing. I think the issue is green hush. I think the real kind of challenge has been business have actually been terrified to really engage and market on this issue in a way that actually can lay out, yes, we've got parts of our portfolio sorted out. There's still work we're doing in the background, because immediately what happens is you're attacked on the stuff in the background. Whereas if you just employ game theory and say, well, basically, if we all go together, but it's not about our brands, our portfolio, our products and top-line growth, it's actually about creating the conditions where demand can shift globally from something that's conspicuous to something that's much more conscientious, much more collaborative.
Can I just hop in there? I mean, this whole point about greenwashing, the worry about it, is vital. I've told you the story before about how I've gone grey over 8 years trying to get M&S to be 20% sustainable. I can probably get it another 10 to 20% sustainable on our own, but there we stop. To become a 100% sustainable organisation, you have to work in partnership with others to change the system, the economy and society in which we operate. To try and do that on your own, impossible. And I think business is waking up to that. The second thing that's driving business actually to do this properly this time is actually necessity. I think we're now starting to look out of a window rather than down at a piece of paper and say there's a theory called climate change to reality. We see it in our supply chains every year: drought, flood, disruption. We see concerns from investors, we see growing concern from consumers. Any business that's not proactively preparing for a very different future faces a very challenging future.
All right. Smart CEOs, smart green-conscious CEOs on one side versus hesitant politicians on the other side is often how this is characterized, especially ahead of Paris and a lot of the other summits out there. I think I read this on the We Mean Business site, which sort of begs this question. However big and bold and savvy the green coalitions are, ultimately it's about government ambition. It's about government urgency to stabilize emissions. So the buck stops with policymakers, right?
Well, I think if you look at the things that we have done that have been most effective from a climate abatement or from a carbon abatement perspective, the Montreal Protocol stands ahead of everything else in terms of 6.3 billion tons of carbon that has been emitted. That was not even about carbon. That was about CFCs. And renewables don't even come into the top 6. They will over the next 10 years. But you know, I think you have to kind of realize that working with the frameworks that we've got, an extension of the Montreal Protocol to encompass other gases would be a hugely effective thing to do, and government have it in their power to take that step.
Good. Well, I'd say that a real business leadership on this issue is about coming together and advocating to government for change, because we do need those policy frameworks that provide the certainty, the level playing ground for businesses to operate within. And so very much that is a role I see for business, and they can do that through sort of exemplifying their own activities to give the politicians space to make these decisions.
Which businesses, which CEOs are governments listening to? Which coalitions are governments taking most seriously? Are these messages being heard by governments? And if so, what makes for an effective, successful message from these coalitions?
I mean, we spoke about the Dutch chief executives, but I want to take us away from that, because I think relying on 5 superstar chief execs or 100 superstar organisations here is not the answer. This is about scale. We're a small village that talks to each other. What matters to us is getting 1 million companies to do what these organisations are doing. So I talk a lot about silver sustainability. I'd rather 100% of businesses in the world did a silver version of carbon sustainability than 10% of us did some gold perfect version that got all the ticks in the boxes. So how do we get scale? And that's why I'm so interested in what trade bodies can do with their conventional membership. The one limitation of people like We Mean Business is, again, it's the IKEAs, the BTs, the Unilevers, again, the same suspects. We need to broaden that group considerably in the future.
What, get the energy companies in there as well, for example?
It's not just energy companies. I think it's from any sector. We need not just a leading 2 or 3. We need hundreds and hundreds of companies. Again, not just in the developed world. One of the most important things we're doing within the Consumer Goods Forum is drive the learning from retailers and fast-moving consumer goods brands in the West into Latin America, into China, into Southeast Asia, and get them to scale the change as well. That's where the economic growth of the future is coming from. They have to get on board.
It's interesting, actually, on that point. You know, I'd be interested in, again, who's driving it from, you know, from a sector level, in terms of the corporates, but also geographically, because, of course, there's this huge developing nations divide at these summits as well. You know, you guys created the problem. You need to sort most of it out. Let's go geographically first, and then by sector. Who do you think is driving the push most successfully? Either of them.
Yeah, I mean, the emerging economies have got a huge role to play in this, and the China-US deal is a great, you know, example of that. Has made a real difference to the mood of the negotiations. So I think they are absolutely key to the negotiation, and the developing nations need to be clear on what their offer is.
Yeah. I also think Modi has given real hope in India as well. I think the noises there have been really positive. I think if you look at what he did in Gujarat, I think it's a real template that he's now trying to, you know, cascade through the rest of all the other regions. So I think with India, with China working together as an axis with the US, and of course we know Europe is we hope Europe is a banker as well. I think you've got the world.
Sorry, just one more thought. I think Africa can leap a generation. Africa faces some of the most extreme impacts of climate change. But if you look at the opportunities they've got in terms of decentralised energy, decentralised mobile phone systems, they can create a new economy, perhaps faster than we can.
Helen, let's get your view on that geographically, you know, from your standpoint, but also I'd be interested to hear what you say about the sectors, if there's anything in that.
And geographically, some of the largest investors in the world are from the developing economies. So the Government Employees Pension Fund from South Africa is a top 10 pension fund globally. Look to Asia, there's a lot of very large pension funds there, and they're prepared, you know, as you say, leapfrog, they're prepared to do things differently to developed world investors as well, and you see a lot of that in Africa, helping the African economies move forward. From sectors, I think it needs to, again, be all the sectors working together, and a recognition that different sectors have different roles to play in each of the years and decades that we face. And recognising that this is a long transition that we're talking about.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just think Africa is the key battleground, because I think if there's two ways we can go. If you look at Lake Tanganyika and the basin that surrounds, all the 4 countries that basically border on the basin there, you've got more natural resources underneath all of that than you do in all of Saudi Arabia. Now, they could go the direction Nigeria went, which is that puts us on a path for 3 degrees, 4 degrees warming. It's absolutely terrifying to think about what could happen. And that's just from the climate side, not even from the social perspective. But and the Lake Tanganyika Authority have a framework in place for sustainable development. What they don't do is have the right private sector players coming in to buy into that vision and say, we will actually put tools on the ground, people on the ground, invest here from a long-term perspective to actually develop all of this sustainably and give us a model that we don't yet have anywhere in the world yet. And this is the second largest forest, the second largest natural lake in the world, and without us really buying into a vision for sustainable development right there, I think we lose the battle one way or the other.
I'm not really sure how this works, but and correct me if I'm wrong, but when does collectively and those companies who run collectively invite Shell and BP to be part of it?
Well, CEO is just down in the audience there, Will Gardner. I might ask him to take that question possibly afterwards. But I think the thing that we've looked at from collectively is really buying into that vision from the very start and saying, that you are on a journey. You don't have to be perfect, but you absolutely have to be on a journey. People always hold up Apple and say, well, Apple wasn't in the CDP, a couple of, just 18 months ago. Now you've got them in the CDP, you've got Tim Cook going to Climate Week, and actually probably one of the CEOs, when you ask Mike around, who else is doing a lot on this, Tim's doing an awful lot, probably more than most people give him credit for. So I do think that there's, a real potential for, collectively to try and find the Teslas, the Nests, these disruptive technologies and give them prominence in the consumer mindset in a way that people will just start to expect that way of living as the new normal, and all of those brands who are on a journey can be part of that.
I mean, Axel, you raised a couple of very important points a moment ago. First is how do you involve the developing world? We have to change the mood music here to about opportunity. So if we can show that development will be better through a low carbon growth plan, people will prosper. And the Sustainable Development Goals, which will be launched in New York in September by the UN, brings us an opportunity to bring climate and development and poverty reduction together. That's an incredibly important opportunity. You challenge us on sectors as well. Which sectors are doing interesting things? I think the European car industry is a really interesting case study, where the European Commission has set a 10-year journey based around grams of CO2 per kilometre travelled to drive down emissions in the consumer's mind, but to squeeze the producers to innovate, to innovate, to innovate. Could they do more? Probably they could. But actually, in terms of changing the entire industry, not just one company, an entire industry, it's a really good case study.
And we actually had, on a different stage, but around here somewhere, the CFO of Jaguar Land Rover giving a very, very positive message on that front as well. Another thing you talked about after Davos was the collapse of the oil price. Okay, we've come back a little bit since, but is that a risk or an opportunity in this space, do you think? Trevor?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one in terms of what's the crash do in terms of investment into renewables and so on. I don't think anyone actually knows for certain, for sure. I mean, how long is this going to last? But I think what is clear that the price volatility that you get with an oil market like that actually puts uncertainty into the investment community. You don't get that level of uncertainty into the renewable sector. We're only going in one direction here, and so therefore I don't see it as undermining, the clear decarbonisation target that we need to be on.
It creates one opportunity as well. If you look at the IEA messages about some of the key things that we could do short term, one of them is taking subsidies off fossil fuels. When the price is low, that's much easier politically.
I don't know if just want to come back to the point around collectively and how we can get the messages out there around better technology being available. But I don't know if many people in the room have seen Jeremy Clarkson's coverage at Top Gear 3 weeks ago of the new BMW i8. But for me, that was a seminal episode of Top Gear, because for the longest time, Jeremy Clarkson has probably been the last person in the world you'd ever thought could be, progressive on climate change and sustainable development. Yet Ellen MacArthur and other people that we work with have assured me that no, he's actually just a critic of the technology, and he's a technology purist. When the technology is better, he'll advocate for it. Sure enough, BMW, you know, with all of they're brilliant on circular economy. In fact, the entire automotive industry have come up with the i8, and the technology is just better. And there's this moment where you can get in an M3, you know, for the petrol heads, or he can get an i8, which is for, you know, the millennials and collectively in that audience, and he gets in the i8. Now, he caveats it with, but, you know, range this, that, and the other, but it's his choice. And I think that, for me, in the last couple of months, is one of the biggest examples of a tipping point being reached. And I think what collectively can do is really accelerate those types of stories and bring them to mainstream audiences.
And Axel, to your challenge about the oil price coming down, of course there's going to be some opportunities. I think the subsidies point is a brilliant one. It might have some negative impact on electric vehicles in the short term. We just have to think that through. But I think as a business leader, 2 years ago, you're at crossroads. Either the rising price of oil would get you as a business model, it would go through $150, $200, destroy your cost base, or climate change would get you. Whichever way you go, one of those is going to eat you. So even if the price of oil comes down, rapidly expanding climate change is going to disrupt your business model. So I think the music about rising oil prices will shift, but rapidly turn to the disruption actually caused by climate change.
You know, if we were sitting here in January, would our conversation post-Paris COP21 be that different, do you think? How hopeful are you that something's going to come out of this?
I'd go with the silver sustainability analogy that Mike used. I would rather have rancor and debate and real, you know, unrest that we didn't get a resolution in Paris, and use that to really mobilize the next wave of CEOs, the next you know, constituents, be it young people really rising up against the fact that we haven't got a global deal.
But again, fighting policymaker hesitancy and maybe ineptitude at these big UN summits, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
But what's the tipping point? When does what the coalitions do make the difference?
I tell you when the tipping point is for me, just from a very parochial perspective, it's when I meet one of our engineers who drives one of our white vans. We got 32,000 of them all around the UK. These guys are rolling out fibre. They all read, guaranteed, the Daily Mail and the Sun. When I meet those guys and they say, oh, I'm delighted to meet you. You're our CSO. In fact, they've come and they've sought me out. And they are pushing me to push the whole fleet to EVs. And they say, not only do we want it to go EV, I want solar on my roof so that I can actually plug the thing in when I go home, recharge. I figured out I can do all of my jobs. And I think if we do that at scale, we can create a completely decentralized energy system. And actually, as an employee of the company, I would really buy into that, and something that I think we can uniquely do. When that guy is talking like that, I think that's when I can go surfing.
What for you, Trevor, is the moment when this message actually resonates and gets through? And do we reach that point in our lifetime?
Well, hopefully next January we'll be talking about there being a major moment, a major step has been achieved on this journey. And I mean, what a global deal will do is bring certainty to business communities, certainty to governments to be able to really push this agenda further, knowing that you know, there's a level playing field there now. We're all working to a common goal. You know, the Chancellor can't stand up and say, well, you know, I'm not going to go ahead of the pack because it will be bankrupting to the UK. You know, all of that will just sort of begin to dissipate away, and we have that level playing field, which gives the certainty for businesses, for politicians to really put in place the policies to drive those trajectories down. I mean, for example, a major issue for the UK is we've still got coal on our electricity system. We need to take that off by the mid-2020s. Yeah. Yet the current policy framework probably won't deliver that. And so we need to see governments coming forward with really progressive signals to the market to say, actually, no, we're going to phase out coal, we're going to replace it through gas and through renewables, and eventually 100% renewables. And it is entirely achievable. It's not about damaging our economy. This is actually very much about providing more resilience to our economy. It's making us more competitive. And I think there's this visioning piece that I hear here, which I think is really important. Often people see that this is hair shirt. You know, I've got to give up something. Whether it's the chance of saying I've got to give up growth potential, whether it's a business, I've got to give up profit, whether it's individuals giving up. So actually, we've got to shift that around and talk about opportunity. You know, the Jeremy Clarkson example is a great one there.
And Helen, will we ever hear institutional investors talking about opportunity in that way? Will we ever see them putting aside their...
I definitely think so, because part of what investors globally have been doing recently is making public their positive investments in energy efficiency, renewables, timber, etc. And in terms of tipping points, I think you're now seeing the ministries of health and the military very interested in these issues. So you're getting both risks and multiple systems level thinking coming in. And I think that's a huge difference from, say, a decade ago.
So you really are noticing a big shift in the mentality of some of these investors.
Yes,
and the institutional investors who, let's face it, the short-termists want to often make a quick buck.
And a lot of them have turned their back on pure play coal, and you can't get more big action than that, and we're seeing that globally.